actually a good expression. So if we just to make it interactive, when you hear the word wildlife, just one word that comes to you, one word that you can say this is a synonym for wildlife. Can anybody volunteer? Wildlife, just one word. If you don't say wildlife, what do you say?
Animals.
Sorry?
Animals.
Animals, okay. Who else? Any other idea? Danger, okay. Alright, so why I'm saying this is, there is another word that's also a very good substitute for wildlife, which is, well, within professional circles, very well known. People like Dr. Mark will know, but less well known on the, outside those circles. And that word is biodiversity or biological diversity. And the reason why I'm referring to it is that that is the subject matter of this legislation, this bill that is in the House of Representatives. If you talk about banking, a banking bill or a taxation bill, you know it's tax they're talking about. For this particular bill, this is the subject matter, biological diversity. And without boring you, biological diversity is very simply the diversity of all life. I am usually very reluctant to say planet Earth because we don't know yet if it extends beyond planet Earth. We still don't know. So, but it is the diversity of all life. And that encompasses genetic diversity, species diversity, and diversity of habitats. So it's 3 levels of diversity, not just the people say animals. No, it includes plants, it includes mushrooms, maggots, ants, things that we don't. It's really important that we understand this because the average person on the street when you see wildlife is thinking of antelope or lion. No, it goes more than that. It's trees, it's plants, it's grasses, it's even the food we eat. It's all part of biological diversity. Alright? So that's just the first thing. Now, traditionally, again, it's been said, I've heard a lot said here about bushmeat. Traditionally, as Africans, you and I, we've been a people that have always lived close to nature. Alright? Historically, our people look to the forest as a source of sustenance. The forest for our people in Africa is not a place of danger. I watched a video about the people from the Maasai in Kenya who go to cut meat from lions. I don't know if anybody has. So for people like that, they live like that for generations. When they think of the forest, the word that comes to their mind is sustenance. And it is not a negative word. The negativity came over time and it came from somewhere. And hopefully I'll touch a little bit on that before I just speak on the bill. I don't want this to be very technical at all. So anyway, we've always lived that way, we've lived that way for generations. It wasn't a problem. People went into the bush, they came out with protein, they came out with food, they came out with plants, medicinal plants and all of that. Why was it not a problem? The reason why it was not a problem is one word. It was sustainable. It was sustainable. It didn't threaten the survival of those species that we were taking. And why was that? We had what I call traditional Ismail remedies. Is to tell you that this is not the first time that we're having laws around wildlife. We've always had them. Those traditions I told you about, the traditional safeguards, in many ways were the first laws we had regulating human interaction with wildlife and biological resources. It's something I need you to keep in context. And I speak to you as journalists because you speak to people to make them understand. Now, when globalization happened, those safeguards were sort of eroded. Now you had demand from outside of Africa, right? There was increased demand for trophies, increased demand for timber. That was one of the things that now started to cause, if you like, industrial scale exploitation. We started to lose that sustainability. The natural safeguards were eroded. That balance started tilting. Surveys were carried out during the colonial period, early 20th century. Those surveys sounded the bell of alarm. They are carried out across West Africa, that wildlife stocks across West Africa, including Nigeria, were depleting. We used to have elephants all over in this country. If you ask your people from Indo still have them, many parts of this country still have elephants. Calabar have the helps of in Bauchi. We're all over the place, right? So when all of this happened, it immediately affected them. And the colonial authorities noticed it, and for the first time, they started to introduce formal laws, what we call laws today, apart from our traditional laws. Because our people lived with nature. There was no segregation that we have today, like say national parks. So people didn't have that. People lived with animals. That interaction was there, balance. There was respect. The animals respected us, we respected them. The forest respected us, we respected the forest. Right? There were things you didn't do in the forest. You don't go to the forest and set fires to it the way you do today. So anyway, so in early 20th century, we had the first laws, game reserve laws, forest reserve laws. Whenever you hear reserve, be very wary. It's not conservation. They are just saving the animals for when they can kill them, the trees for when they can cut them. So that was the idea. The idea wasn't yet conservation. It was like, okay, let's not finish it, let's remain some cell next year, that kind of thing. And our people didn't take very well to it because this was an intrusion into cultural understandings of how you interact with natural environment. So it didn't work very well. The second survey was carried around the time we got independence, and that was the final bell of alarm. And that led to a policy shift. And I will get to the reason why it led to a policy shift. From that point onwards, the policy, globally, but especially in Africa, now became a policy of separation. They now saw that the whole idea of trying to regulate interaction with wildlife, these people had their traditions, they could take and maintain the balance. It was now seen that those natural safeguards had weakened. There was need to introduce separation. That was how the idea of national parks and in-situ conservation, which many of you are familiar with, came on. So gradually from around that time, the idea was this area is a national park, it's for animals, everybody else. Right? That was how it started gradually. So this coincided, well, I don't think it's coincidence, with when the world started to realize that there is a biodiversity crisis. That is to say, that across the world, extinctions are happening at an unprecedented rate compared to at any other time in human history. And fortunately for us, the international community was aware. Africa is biodiversity rich, together with Latin America and Asia. And the international community reacted in a way that would sort of hold things to a check. And what they did was the world agreed a number of international agreements. In law, we call them conventions or treaties. And these treaties are targeted at addressing key threats, the key threats that were responsible for that situation. There is one, the trade-based threats, and that is international trade and local trade. There is the habitat-based threats. One of the things, the consequence of globalization, of course, is increase in human population, including Nigeria, and that immediately affected agricultural and other forest land uses. There was now conversion of forests to farmlands and all of that. Of course, that's now going into the habitat threats. So these were broadly the two main threats, the trade-based threats, the habitat threats. Climate change, of course, is a threat, but not as much as the human threat, the trade-based threats and the habitat that human beings were engineering. So global response to that was the world agreed, first of all, what is called the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, CITES for short. Many of you will be familiar with it. Now, what that treaty does is it recognizes that one